Hi, I'm Chuck with Fish Fighter Products. Wow, what a beautiful morning out here on the Columbia River. It's early spring, we've got the rods out and working, and we started talking a little bit about plug selection for salmon fishing. And I'm out here with a friend of mine and a fishing guide, as well as host of Day One Outdoors, Cody Herman. Morning, Cody.
Morning, sir.
A lot of people have been asking about why you would choose one plug over another, and there's been people coming in or calling us talking about, you know, when should I use scents and baits? When should I use sinkers? And I've asked Cody, because you're out here making a living doing this, right? Day in and day out. And I wanted to ask Cody just to spend some time with the viewers and show us why. Let's start with, why would you choose one plug over another?
Sure. So when it comes to plug selection, in my opinion, there are two different types of plugs that exist on the market today. There's your flat running plug, and then there's your diver. So your flat running plugs are like your Kwik fish or flat fish. And the way that they swim through the water is they are parallel to the bottom.
Okay.
Your divers, like your mag lips in this case, or K11, K13Xs from the Kwik fish side, the divers like this mag lip, they run nose down. So they're digging deeper. I like running these diving plugs like the mag lip in shallower water, 15 feet of water or less. Today we're out here, the water's high, it's off color, it's muddy, we're fishing shallower water. So in this case, we're running a lot of free diving plugs, just flatline, no lead, no divers, no jet divers.
So I just want to back up a minute here on this diver plug.
Yeah.
So this morning we're go ahead and rigged up. We've got this thing running back behind the boat, and the theory is that in 10 to 15 foot of water, that plug's going to work its way down. It's going to hit the bottom, maybe bounce up, and then hunt and peck, and it's going to be moving all through the water column.
Exactly. It's covering the water more left to right. So it's down at the bottom, within the foot of the bottom the whole time, but it's searching back there.
And,
so
and on this one, we wouldn't use any lead at all on that. We're just letting the lure find its way.
You bet.
And would it be fair to say that a good way to see if this thing's doing its job is if the rod tip shows the lure going down, then the rod tip backs up.
You got it.
Then you see the rod tip load up, that tells us the lure's working.
Exactly. You know that it's down there and it's in the strike zone.
Absolutely.
It's in the area where the fish are going to be traveling.
Okay.
So these are very popular for in the conditions that we're seeing right now, or anytime that you're fishing shallower water. When you're running these bigger plugs, your flat running plugs like the T50 flatfish or your K14, K15 Kwik fish, a lot of times you're going to be using lead. So you put down 4 to 6 ounces to keep it down there near the bottom, because these by themselves will only dive maybe 6 or 8 feet.
Okay.
What's nice about these plugs, especially in this off-color water, is that they have a big, heavy thump. They have a wide action, a wide wiggle to them. And so the fish know, they can feel it in their lateral line. They can feel that thump a lot better than something that has a little bit more of a tighter action to it, like these diving plugs. So right now we have the divers out there, and they're hunting, they're covering a lot of ground, which is great, but if we don't get bit on those, we'll play around with some flat running plugs like this T50.
Sure, I like what you said this morning when I asked you. I said, Cody, why would we use one plug over another? And you said, we're going to let the fish decide,
exactly.
Right? We got a bunch of rods out in the water. We're trying different variations. And I thought that was a really good comment, that we're going to let the fish decide what's working today.
Well, it's never up to us. And in salmon fishing, it's a lot different than other techniques, like bass or trout, where you catch a lot of fish. In this case, a good day is 2-3 fish.
Sure.
These fish here, these spring chinook on the Columbia River, they go for $50 to even $100 a pound. One fish is a godsend.
Absolutely.
So it's tough to say, we have these different plugs out there. Let's say we get bit in the next few minutes on one of these diving plugs. Should we switch them all over to the diving plug? Who's to say?
Sure.
Because I don't know if that fish would have bit one of those T50s, a flat running plug. He could have bit a herring, could have bit a prawn, a spinner. We don't know. All we know is that it didn't hurt.
But that's the good thing of fishing with somebody like you, a guide, right? Your friends are out here fishing, you're fishing daily, and you can start to develop a pattern of what
Correct.
the fish are liking, right?
Yep, absolutely. But again, we never know for certain. So a lot of times what I like to do is actually let the customers decide what plugs and gear that they want to run for two reasons. One, because they're going to pick something out that normally I wouldn't.
Sure.
And two, it's plausible deniability. If they don't catch anything, it wasn't my fault.
Absolutely. So now that we've covered a little bit about plug selection, I want to talk a little bit about scents and baits. Sure. And it was interesting. I was going through a tackle store in Portland yesterday as getting ready for our trip, and I was reading the back of some bait, and I saw that it was partially developed by you.
Yep.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Once you decide what plug you want to run, scent is definitely the next important factor to consider.
Cody, when it comes to scent, it's no secret that almost I don't even know if there is a guide on the Columbia River that doesn't wear gloves when they're out here salmon fishing. Would you agree with that or not?
Absolutely, and in my opinion, that's for a couple reasons. One, you don't want to go home smelling like fish, but these fish also are able to go back within a few feet of where they were born. They could smell that well. So anything that we can do to up our odds to try and get one of these fish to commit to the gear that we're presenting to them helps.
Sure.
In this case, gloves.
Yeah, I like to say that salmon use sight, smell, and sound, and why not put all three of them in your favor, right?
Exactly.
You know, we've talked before on our videos about L-serine, the amino acid that gets secreted out of humans and comes out of the sweat glands, and fish find it offensive and sometimes even repulsive. And I strongly feel that gloves help put more of the advantages. As you said earlier,
Sure.
you know, salmon prices are going astronomical.
Yeah.
Those of us that get a few days to go on a trip with you, it costs money and it's a big deal. And let's try to absolutely make the best of every trip that we can. And wearing gloves is definitely a big part of that.
It does, and the way I always look at things, not just for gloves, but also with choosing baits to use or even colors, we never know for certain if it actually helps. We know it didn't hurt.
Sure.
So do gloves absolutely help? We don't know, we can't say for certain, but do they hurt? Definitely not. So let's make sure to wear them every single day, soap up, glove up, and do everything that we can in our power to try and help our favors out.
Sure. You mentioned scent, and I got to tell you, it was neat last night. I came into Portland, and I was doing a little bit of tackle shopping because, you know, I'm kind of a geek when it comes to tackle.
We all are,
yeah, all are. Yeah. Before we started rolling, I asked Cody, "Why do you have so many lures?" He said, "Well, first and foremost, because they're shiny, right? Because we all love shiny things."
We're gear junkies, absolutely.
But as I was walking through the tackle shop last night, I couldn't help but notice that there's a bait out that you've helped develop with Procure for salmon fishing?
Well, now that we've decided what plug that we want to use, and in this case here, we've been running the divers for a little while. I'm going to tie up one of these flat running plugs, this T50 Flatfish. Now we need to decide what type of scent to add to it. So we picked out our action,
Sure.
which is the flat running. We picked out our presentation with the color. Now we got to figure out scent.
Sure, and I'm a guy that's always used either anchovies or sardine fillets on the bottom of my Kwik fish. But I see you've got, well, I guess we could go ahead and talk about that, but I'm really interested in the fish nip that you developed with Procure.
So there's a lot of options out there in the market. You know, the most common thing to wrap on a plug is definitely a sardine fillet. And that is by far and away an extremely productive bait to use. It's fatty, it's oily. What's become a little bit more popular here recently is guys are running canned tuna. And the reason why is because tuna is very, very smelly, fatty, oily. So it's a good scent that lasts for a long time, the fish can key in on. How many salmon are out there eating tuna out in the ocean? None. So it has everything to do with scent and smell.
Okay.
The genesis of fish nip was, I was tired of using canned bait because anytime you can something, you cook it out, it kills a lot of the scent and the flavor. So Procure, they were able to help me out in developing a bait that was tuna based, but it is raw meat. It's never been canned, it's never been cooked out. It has all the natural scent and smell that you possibly can out of a tuna. Just like if you're using a raw sardine or a raw tuna belly when you wrap it on your plug. So this is all just basically chewed up, shredded tuna with some bite stimulants and a few other things added to it to try and get as much scent as possible down there.
Well, I can't help but notice sometimes filleting fish and cutting them out with your scissors and getting the right size is a little bit of a little bit more difficult. Could you show the packaging? I kind of wanted to show the packaging to everybody because as you see it hanging on the store like this, are you recommending that we refrigerate this after we open it, or?
Well, you see it's hanging on the shelf, it doesn't look like much.
Right.
But we put on the back all the applications where it can be used, not just on your plugs, but also in your super baits or clamshell style baits. You can customize it, use it for trout even. We've got a lot of trout using it, or even behind a spin glow for the guys plunking off the bank. Once you do open it, it is vacuum packed up. So once you do open it, put it into a Ziploc, and it will last for at least a month, 30 days in your refrigerator.
If you keep it refrigerated.
Exactly. So it helps save you money in the long run. You know, for the most part, guys will buy 2-3 trays of herring a day. This stuff here, I've used just one package of it, and this will probably last me 3 or 4 trips, rotating my baits every hour, even fishing 6 rods.
So you do recommend that we're rotating about every hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Could you go ahead and show us how you would rig up a Kwik fish with this?
So when we're adding bait to our plugs here, whether it is the fish nip or sardine, tuna, whatever it is, we need to make sure that we don't alter the balance of the plug itself. The manufacturer spent years developing the perfect action for these lures and creating the right balance. You add too much, you kill the action. Don't add enough, what was the point in putting it on in the first place? On these mag lips, they actually have on the sides little notches. And those are a guide. You want to keep the meat, sardine, fish nip, whatever, inside of those notches.
So these little, I always thought them were just put on there for action or looks, but you're saying it's a guide to help keep your baits within a range?
Yep, to keep it near the center eyelet here on the plug. You balance everything. The plugs are moving, wide wiggle, nose to tail. The pivot point is here in the center.
Sure.
So we try and keep all of our bait right there in the center itself so it's not altering the action. Those little ridges there also help when you're wrapping it on. They get caught.
Yeah, it keeps the magic thread from sliding back, and or whatever type of thread you use.
So in this case here, we're going to be wrapping up one of our flat running plugs, this T50 flatfish.
Okay.
And in this case, because we're going to use a lead to keep it down, we have plenty of current, so I'm not worried about getting enough action out of it. We need a lot of scent. Water's off color in this case. We want to get their attention. These plugs have a wide wiggle. They
visibility
snap.
Today is, we feel, is around 18 inches.
Yep. Yeah, it's
so
tough.
It's not very much. So we're really relying a lot on sound and scent today, right?
Absolutely. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to take this, and you start. What's nice about this stuff too, it actually forms up in your hand almost like Play-Doh.
Sure.
So just take a little bit, form it up in my hand, and place it on the bottom of the plug, like so.
Okay.
And it'll just stay just like that. Move the hook and put just a little bit up front. Again, if we put too much up front, it's going to put too much weight near the nose, killing the action.
Sure.
So I'm just going to take a little bit here. Form it up as well. That way it all sticks together. A little bit in front of the front eyelet. There it is, just like that. And again, we can use a little bit more than I typically do because we have good current and it's off-colored water. We want to make sure that they smell it.
So the current's going to help keep the lure working, right?
Exactly.
So if it was slower current, you might want to
use less.
A little bit less. I got you.
Use less. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our stretchy thread here, and we're going to start at the tail end of it. And I pinch it with my thumb. That way it holds it in place. And then you just start your wrap. What's nice about this bait too is that you can move it around. If I need to push a little bit more up front, just push it up a little bit there. And we just start wrapping.
If you were going to just use canned tuna with your own scent in it, the process would be
identical.
Identical to this.
Yep.
As well as if you were going to use a sardine fillet, right? You would be laying it up in there, tucking it up around the treble hook, and getting a good wrap on it.
You got it. Yep. So we got it all wrapped on here. So now what you need to do is create a lock-off knot, and a hitch, a half hitch, does that perfectly. So I take my index finger, wrap the stretchy thread up over top, then I take my roll and put it through there. I do that 2 or 3 times, just creating a little hitch. It locks that thread in place.
Sure.
Then just pull it tight, and it'll just break. Now it's all set. It's centered up, it's balanced. And now the next step is to make sure everything is tuned up and swimming properly. Again, these plugs are designed to perfection. We need to make sure that this back eyelet is sitting perfectly straight up and down. Same thing with this belly eyelet. It's in line with the center line of the plug. And then since we've added weight, we're going to attach this to our line, put it in the water, pull it through the water, and see if it's swimming left or right. And if it is, these are all screw eyes. We can just twist it left or right.
Well, why don't we go ahead and just rig up a few poles, so or bring in a pole so we can show them how we're rigging the pole, so we can talk about different ways to rig, whether we're flat lining or using a sinker, and the importance of dropper length as well.
And I skipped over one thing that's very important.
Okay.
And I thought about this when I was wrapping that on. We talked about how important scent is from the gloves to adding the right bait to it. Every time, not just to keep your gear clean, to get all the oils off from the baits that you're using, but every single time I clean my plugs up. Takes off any other scents, your human scent, the factory scent, any old bait scent that might be on there. So I take some spray soap, put that on, little scrub brush. Make sure you get around the center eyelet.
Yeah, and I believe this is what separates an average fisherman from a great fisherman, don't you?
Attention to detail.
Absolutely.
Little things. So now that I've got it all soaped up, quick rinse. Now it's ready to be baited. So before I even put this one down, I'm cutting that bait off and I'm doing it over.
Yeah, got to make sure we get it washed, we get it right. I even go so far as to take my plastic storage trays or my fish fighter tackle tray, and I'll stick it in the dishwasher and wash it periodically before the season starts, just to make sure that I'm not transporting scents, back and forth. It really helps if you're a little bit of a germaphobe, maybe, right? And
and it's what's really interesting is we take all this time and effort to do all this to clean everything up. But the one thing that always is in the back of my head, the second I put these gloves on, I soap up my hands, I clean everything up, I clean the plug up, I put my hand right here on top of the console.
Sure.
I get all that scent right back on my gloves.
Well, and the nice thing about the fish fighter gloves is you can just soap your gloves up, wash them, and
Exactly.
you're back in business again.
Take a little bit of soap, put it on there, and then I don't even actually rinse my hands off. I leave the soap on.
You just go ahead and leave the soap on. So
It's all on. Perfect.
before we get into rigging poles, let's just say it's my first time salmon fishing. Don't have fish nip in my area. Gonna get a sardine, want to cut it, fillet it out, and put it on a Kwik fish or a mag lip or any type of plug. Can you
Sure.
go ahead and walk me through the process?
Absolutely. So what we want to do is, again, create balance. Now, using either fish nip or canned tuna, it's really easy to just form it up and create exactly the right amount of bait to have on there, so that way it creates the balance. But with sardine, you got to start with fillet nets. We'll do that here right now. The way I start by filleting is just like what we do our salmon. So you start right behind the gill plate, right behind the pectoral fin. We're going to come down and hit the backbone, then come all the way back to the back of the fish. Now we don't need to be too concerned about leaving meat on the bone, because this isn't a salmon that's worth a lot of money.
Sure.
This is just a bait that we're cutting up. So we're just going to go down to the backbone, then all the way across.
Okay.
Lift up the pectoral fin, hit the backbone, turn the knife blade, and then just keep it at a slight angle down so I can feel the backbone all the way across. There we go. So now we have our fillet.
Sure.
But this is too wide of a strip to be putting on the bottom of our plug. See, it's just too wide. It's going to overlap on both sides. So now what we're going to do is we're going to trim it up. But we also need to consider not just how wide it is, but how thick it is across. See how narrow it is here, how a lot less meat there in the belly cavity as opposed to near the backbone. So what I'm going to start by doing is just cut right down on the upside of the belly cavity there. There we go. Now it's a little bit straighter strip, but again, we have a little bit of a shallower side along the backbone. So I'll do the same over there.
You're just going to square up the sides, true them up.
Exactly.
Do you think there can be too much meat or not enough meat in this portion right here?
Well, what I do now is I cut off that little section right back here, the ½ inch towards the tail.
Okay.
Again, trying to create consistent thickness all the way through.
You bet.
And what I also do is I don't size up my baits at this point in time. I leave the fillet whole, because in each situation it calls for more or less meat. So if I want to get more action out of my lure, I might only use a strip that's about 1 inch long.
Okay.
If, in this case, dirty water, good enough current, it can get a lot of action out of my plugs, I could push that up to a 2 inch long strip. So that's what we'll do here. So I match it up, right at the back end there, up to about here. That's going to be my cut point.
You got it?
Thank you, sir. Okay. So now we have our strip, and we're going to cut right down the center of it.
The guy that taught me says he likes to make it look like a pair of pants.
Exactly. Yep. Don't cut it all the way through, just enough to get it around this center eyelet. So we've already washed our plug here. This is one of my favorite colors called Payday. A lot of contrast to it. Let's slide it up from the back end of the plug forward, up around the eyelet. And now
Does it matter to you whether it goes from the front or the back, or is it just personal preference?
It's personal preference, really.
Sure.
You can go either way, but it's the way I was taught, so here's how we're doing it.
Do it.
So again, I want it to be as centered in the plug as possible, so that way I'm around the pivot point, I'm not altering the action from the two ends. So we have it centered up here right in the middle around the center eyelet. And same deal, just as what we were doing with the fish nip or canned tuna. Get our stretchy thread, pinch with our thumb, and just start wrapping.
I want to remind the viewers, you want to keep the stretchy thread tight as you're wrapping it around so it's really biting down and slicing into the meat.
You got it. So I did the front side there, now it's locked in place. Move the hook out of the way. I'll work on the back. Again, using your fingers to try and keep the meat centered right in the middle of the plug.
So this is basically identical to the way you would use tuna or your fish nip products when you put that on there.
You got it.
But again, like you said earlier today, let's let the fish decide what they want, right? We're going to run
flavor.
different rods with different baits to try to give them a different look and different taste. And there we go, we're ready to go fishing, huh?
Yep. Meat is all centered up in the middle of the plug. Looks good left to right. We're as close to the middle of the plug around the center eyelet as possible. And now we're going to attach to a rod and see how it swims. Make sure it tunes up so it runs perfectly straight. We don't want it blowing out left or right.
Well, and timing is perfect. We've had our rods out now for about an hour, so let's go ahead and reel them in and
switch them up.
Switch them up a little bit. Cody, so kind of the setting we got going on right now is we've got rods working over here on the starboard side of the boat. We got some in close on the port side of the boat. But
right.
What we want to do now is get a pole working way on the outside.
Right.
So I'd like you to show everybody how you're going to rig using a jet diver and a planer board to get a pole working way outside the boat while on anchor fishing for these big king salmon.
Well, what we're trying to do right now on anchor is we're trying to cover a travel lane. Now, we have this little bush line right behind us that the fish are forced to come around. And so we've been fishing everything as close and tight to that as possible. No luck yet. So what do? You open up your spread. Try and cover as much water as possible. Now, granted, the watercolor is not the best. So opening up your spread, you might be missing a few fish getting through your gear. But at this point in time, we're going to try it all.
Okay.
So what we want to do is, whether we're using the planer board, jet diver, whatever, we always want to consider the system that we're using. And the system is everything working together, the rod, reel, line, along with your terminal gear and your lures. What I have here is, this is just an 8-foot rod, not too long. It's perfect for running a planer board because the rod is not going to be imparting action on the lure. This is braided line, 65-pound Maxima braid.
Okay.
It's really nice and strong, thin diameter, allows our gear to work better with less drag from the current.
I got to admit, when I looked at this low-profile reel, my first reaction was, hey, that's too small for a king
Yep.
salmon. Although we are in a boat, we can drop back and go fight them. Any comments on that?
Well, that's what's nice about the braided line too. Thinner diameter so I can get more on there. I have about 150 yards. If I can't land them in almost 500 feet, we weren't going to land them anyways.
Okay.
The only time that'll ever get spooled in this situation is if a sea lion grabs it.
But you feel the braking's adequate in there on the friction disc and all that?
You know, a lot of people overthink the drag capacity. They always think, oh, I need 15, 20 pounds of drag. They look at a reel and go, oh, it has 10 ball bearings and 20 pounds of drag. That's what I want. Well, I can tell you that in marlin fishing, your strike is around 12 to 15 pounds for marlin. If you push that up to 20 pounds, I've had 20 pounds of drag stand me up out of the chair marlin fishing. 20 pounds is way more than what you'll ever need for salmon. In most cases, we're running no more than 6 to 8 pounds.
Gotcha. Because as we talked earlier, as the salmon's coming upriver, when he nails that plug and he goes to turn, you don't want your rod loading up and then flinging the lure out of his mouth. So you want the drag soft enough that when he hits that and he turns, it takes the lure with him. Is that correct?
Exactly. And with braided line, there's zero stretch. No stretch, as opposed to monofilament where there could be, several feet of stretch. And so what you want to do is make sure you have a long, soft parabolic rod. In this case here, this rod will load up perfectly.
Gotcha.
It'll bend with the fish, and as the fish starts to bite, it'll load, and then you see it's all backbone on the back to drive the hook home.
Gotcha.
But with that, you want to also back your drag off a little bit. If it's too tight, the rod's going to lock down too soon, pull the hooks out of the fish's mouth. The one mistake I see a lot of anglers do is they set the hook. Again, there's no stretch in braided line. So if you set the hook, an inch of movement at the rod tip is an inch of movement at the fish.
Sure.
Something has to give. You're either tearing a bigger hole, bending the hook out, breaking your leader, something's popping. Because even with an 8-foot rod, a shorter salmon rod, a lot of guys use 9, 10 footers. With this 8-foot rod, if I start here straight out at 90 degrees and then come all the way up for a
through
hook
an
set,
arc.
that just moved at about 4 feet. Either the fish moved 4 feet or something broke. Your line, hook bent out, something's happening.
Right, when you got a 25, 30 pound Chinook salmon and he or she nails that bait and turns sideways, there's an incredible amount of force being loaded on it already, right?
And that's why we have a rod that locks down on the back end of it, around the second, third eyelet there, and it's all backbone, it's all power. So when that fish comes up and bites, it pulls, 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 and then it hits that backbone. The backbone's already setting the hook for us.
So it'd be safe to say that you're better to let them take it until they're completely hooked, right? The hard part's to stay away from the rod and let the rod do the work, right? Sit on your hands.
So we got our braided line on down to our terminal gear. Now what I always do is I set it up with a slider. This just allows me to have versatility. So when we're running just our flat running plugs, our divers, the mag lips, I just unclip that, straight line, 30 pound Maxima Ultra Green out to our lure.
Well, I also notice here that you're running a rubber bumper here too. Can you kind of talk about that?
You bet. So we're creating space. So that way our slider is not hitting directly onto the knot itself where it's tied onto our bead chain. This little rubber, it's called a rubber bead.
And it just slides over and protects the knot. So as this slider's coming down and pounding on it, we're not tearing away at the knot, correct?
Exactly. So there you go. It comes in and just hits that rubber bead. It's not impacting the knot.
Right. So when this is out in the water, the jet diver's going to be pulling down. This is going back to the rod, and then your lure's working behind the diver.
Yep, and we're running it about 6 feet out there, and two things are going to happen, what the jet diver helps us do. One, it allows us to fish different parts of the water behind the boat. We aren't having to back the lead out, because sometimes if the current's too slow, it's tough to fish a long ways beyond the boat. So we can fish different parts of the ledge. But what it also does is it hunts. It's swinging left and right, it's covering more of the water column. If you're running 6-8 ounces of lead, you're stuck in the dirt right there.
Well, in this situation, the rod's on near the boat. We've used sinkers, we bounce them back.
Yep.
But we want to get this rod way out, so it'd be very impossible, or next to impossible, to get lead working out the side. So by going to a diver, we can float this guy out of the way and get it where you want it, and then install the side planer.
Exactly. So we've wrapped up our plug here, we've tuned it up. We're dropping it in the water first, then our jet diver. And since we're pushing it out away from all the other gear, we don't need to be concerned about having the proper spacing between the other rods. So I can just let it out the distance that I feel it needs to fish at the proper depth.
And if you, by chance, don't have a line counter, you're going to get a visual of this as it floats back, right?
Yep, or you can also count back and forth. So the line guide going back and forth here.
How many feet, measure how many feet each wrap of the...
Or just, I need 6 or 8 back and forth.
Sure.
And right now, since I do have a line counter here, you can see the line counter is working away. We're at 30 feet. I'm gonna let this go out to 75, and then we're gonna attach our planer board. The plug in the jet diver will just float back out away from all the gear. We're at 75 right about here.
And you can see it back there about 75 feet.
You got it. Now Chuck, I'm gonna hold on to this for me. We're gonna use a planer board here. So this is a technique that's pretty new to the Pacific Northwest. The guys in the Great Lakes, they're allowed to use more than 1 rod per person. In fact, they can use 3 or 4 rods per person.
Okay.
And in that instance, those guys are running 12, 15, 18 rods on each boat. So how do you separate it out, keep them from tangling? You run these planer boards. So what I'm gonna start out by doing is creating a bite. So I'm just twisting up the line. Then I'm taking my planer board, and on the front side up here with the beveled edge, this orange clip, open it up, put it on that twisted up line. And that is what's going to break free when the fish bites.
Okay.
Now I'm going to take the back end here, and on this back clip, it has a button inside of it. And you put your line in behind that button, that way you'll never lose the planer board. It just stays connected. So it unconnects there, stays connected here, that way there's no more drag. You can just reel the fish directly in. Open it up behind the button, like so. Looks good.
You've created this bite right here in the line just so that it'll help grip on these larger fish, right?
Oh, it just doesn't. It doesn't come undone unless the fish bites.
Doesn't come out as fast.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So now it's ready to go in. So I'm going to set it in the water here, and Chuck, you're going to go ahead and let it go. There you go. Let it swim back there.
Here, I'll go ahead and hand the rod over.
Okay. So we started out 75 feet on line counter. I want to cover a lot of water, get it out away from everything. So I'm going to kick this out to 125, 50 feet. Now it's starting to pull away from us here. There we go, 125. Set it in the rod holder and you'll watch that planer board just push away from the boat. And that jet diver and plug are pulling on that planer board, but the current is sucking it out away from the boat.
Sure, and now in this situation, this is how, you know, this boat, your guide boat that we're on right now is 30 foot long, right? So you can fish 6 clients. You've got usually a rod out the back, you've got a couple in, a couple a little bit further out, but if you need to get way out using these planer boards, is about the only way you can successfully fish 6 rods on a boat.
Otherwise, you're only fishing the same exact line, part of the water column, the travel lane.
Okay, well now that we've addressed using planer boards, can we go ahead and get another pull in and talk a little bit about back bouncing with a sinker and how we can rig up closer?
Yep, we're running also prawn and herring, so let's grab one of those, rebait them up, and talk about those techniques.
Sounds great. Cody, standard protocol for anchor fishing, at least with the people I've been with, has been either a quick fish or a Brad's or some sort of a lure wrapped with sardine wrap. That's pretty standard protocol on anchor. But I noticed you like to mix it up a little bit and use some prawns. You tie your own lures. Could you go ahead and take a moment and walk us through the thought process? And one thing that you've said over and over today that resonates well with me is you have a system approach, a systematic approach to everything.
Yep.
And I think that's really good where you're developing consistency in everything you do. So could you go ahead and talk a little bit about your system for using prawns?
Sure, the rationale behind using a prawn out here, usually when the water temp gets up around 48, 50 degrees, the prawns really tend to do well. Right now we're at 40, 45. So 44, 45, so it's on the cooler side. But I'm already running 2 herring. We have 2 plugs out there with wraps. We know that those types of gear, that equipment will work, but why not mix it up a little bit? The fish have 4 different options out there. What if they want a prawn?
Sure.
And we're not using it. So that's why we're putting that thing out there on just one of the rods down the middle. So what I have here is we have enough current to run a spinner blade. So this is a Hildebrandt number 4. In my opinion, the Hildebrandt they're just some of the best finishes out there. They're really bright. And I like doing that, especially when it's cloudy right now. So either a copper or a gold will work well. Because we have almost no wind rip, I'm using the gold. Greenish chartreuse works great for springers, especially enough color water. I put in a little bit of contrast right there. One center bead that's a solid color, the other 2 are translucent. And then I have a little piece of wire back here, and I use the wire to straighten my prawn out. A lot of guys like to run them twisting, some guys like to run them straight. With this wire, I can do both. So what I start by doing is pinching off the little tail piece right here. So I get rid of that. That opens up the body cavity here to insert the wire. So I'm going to take my wire, insert it into the back end here. And if I want to have the prawn have a little bit of curl so that way it spins in the water, I just stop short. That way the head hangs down. Gotcha. And I'll put the hook in there. And that way that little bend will create the spin. Right now, we have 2 herring that are spinning, plugs that are working. I'm gonna make this a little bit easier presentation for them to grab onto. So we're gonna make this just run straight. There we go. Now I'm gonna take my front hook here. This is a 2/0 single octopus bend. And they have a hood, which is their head cavity. So I'm gonna start by putting the hook into the meat, then out through the hood. The reason why is because that hood tends to open up and blow out.
You don't want it to pop up.
It helps keep it in place. So I'll start back here in the meat, like so. Come through, then out through the hood. Just like that. Then I lay the hook flat on top of the prawn there as well.
Okay.
Now you see I got a treble hook. I'll let that be my stinger. Just sit right back there in case you got a fish that's coming up and just short biting it. Especially in this cold water, these fish will come up and short strike.
Yep.
So now I got that in place, everything looks good, but I want to make sure that the hood doesn't come up and the bait runs perfect while it's sitting down there. We don't want any instance where this bait might be fishing incorrectly. So what we're going to do is take our stretchy thread once again and just wrap it around this lead hook in the hood. Just keeps it in place.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about making sure. Wouldn't it be sad when that school of fish that we're anticipating to make a move makes a move to find out that this prawn, that the hood's up or that
Hood's up, blown
something's
out,
fouled
yeah.
up, and yeah, there's just no chance for errors.
Control the things that you can control.
Absolutely.
You can't make them bite. You can't force them to come up and come chew on your gear, but you can make sure that your gear is always fishing properly.
Sure. And I think using prawns is just another. It's just another option to put out there, another tool in your toolbox, right?
Exactly.
Until we find out what's working.
Yep, so there it is, and we'll slide that spinner down. That's gonna create a little bit of thump, a little bit of action, some contrast in the color. And it should look great in the water too, especially with this high sun.
Now, on this one here, we could choose to run either a sinker or a jet diver. Is that correct? Or would you prefer to just stay with a sinker?
I would run the sinker. The blade has weight to it, and with the jet diver, it pulls everything down really close to the bottom. This may just be laying on the bottom of the jet diver.
I gotcha.
So in this case here, we are gonna run the lead, and we're gonna back it out behind the boat. And the distance of my leader compared to my dropper is about a foot difference there.
Gotcha. And you would control the dropper depth and the leader length based on how deep of water you're fishing, right?
And the current speed.
And
if
the
the
current
current
speed.
was really slow, just enough to spin the spinner blade, and I still wanted to run it, I would probably shorten that leader up to be about the same distance as the lead to make sure that it stays off the bottom.
So when it's in the water, we're not down here hitting right on the bottom.
Yep, yeah, it's staying up in the water column.
Yep.
So you just put this in the water here. It looks perfect. Prawn's running
Absolutely.
straight. Blade's working hard, and you can still see that my slider for my lead dropper is up out of the water. And you can see the weight of the spinner blade and the prawn on the hooks has dropped it down about 6 inches. So we can already take 6 inches off my dropper length, which in this case is about 2.5 feet.
Right.
So I know it'll be right about 2 feet off the bottom. Perfect. Right
So
on their
what we're
nose.
seeing up here is going to be the same when it's underwater or when it's down up against the bottom, relatively.
Close. Relatively, yeah. I mean, that's a hour-long conversation.
Sure,
so,
sure.
The current speed is always fastest in the middle of the water column. So it slows down on the surface because of wind and air resistance. It slows down at the bottom because of the sand and rock that's down there.
But one thing that is consistent with this system is that the dropper maintained the same, your swivels maintained are all same. This is all part of the Cody Herman systematic approach to salmon fishing, if we could say.
Got it. Everything's the same.
Consistency, consistency, consistency with minute adjustments.
That way when you do get bit, you can replicate.
Yeah, I noticed when we were off camera a little bit ago tuning a lure, you were talking it's just thousandths of an inch.
In tuning our plugs, absolutely. Tiny little changes will make a world of difference.
So I guess all that's left now is to go ahead and put these poles out and wait for the bite.
The fun part of anchor fishing, sitting around doing nothing.
Absolutely.